On November 24, 1971, a man in a dark suit steps up to an airline counter in Portland, Oregon, pays cash, and gives a name no one can verify: Dan Cooper. 30 minutes later, he is seated at the back of a Boeing 727, sipping a bourbon and soda, looking like every other tired traveler on the eve of Thanksgiving. He is so ordinary, so meticulously forgettable that none of the 36 passengers around him will be able to describe him to investigators the next morning. And that is entirely the point. Within hours, this nameless man in seat 18E will pull off the most audacious heist in American aviation history, collecting $200,000 in cash, parachuting into a freezing rainstorm over the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, and vanishing so completely that after 45 years, hundreds of suspects, over 60 volumes of case files, and one of the longest investigations the FBI has ever run. The world still does not know his real name, not who he was, not whether he survived, not where the money went. The D.B. Cooper hijacking remains, to this day, the only unsolved case of air piracy in the history of commercial aviation. This is the complete story: the night, the crime, the clues no one could crack, and the ghost who walked off the back of a jet plane and into legend. The afternoon of November 24th, 1971, is gray and cold in Portland. Millions of Americans are on the move for the holiday. At Portland International Airport, a man in his mid-40s approaches the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter around 2 in the afternoon. He pays $18.52 in cash for a one-way ticket on Flight 305, a 30-minute hop north to Seattle. He writes the name Dan Cooper on his ticket. No identification is required. This is an era before metal detectors, before baggage screening, before any security of any kind. He could be anyone, and that is exactly who he is. He waits at the gate, boards last, and takes his seat. 18E, the very last row of the aircraft, right beside the rear exit door and its deployable air stair. He orders a bourbon and 7-Up, lights a Raleigh filter cigarette, and settles in. His appearance is meticulously ordinary. Witnesses will later describe a white male, somewhere between 5'10" and 6'1", about 175 pounds, with olive-toned skin, brown eyes, short dark hair combed back, and no discernible regional accent. He is wearing a black business suit, the jacket and pants don't quite match, a white shirt, and a thin black clip-on tie from J.C. Penney. A lightweight black raincoat, plain brown loafers, dark wraparound sunglasses. He is, by every account, the kind of man you forget the moment you look away. A University of Oregon student sitting directly across the aisle will spend the entire flight next to this man, and later tell the FBI he can remember almost nothing about him, only a loose fold of skin under his chin. Most of the 36 passengers will say the same thing. They cannot remember him at all. Shortly after the 2:50 p.m. departure, Cooper folds a note and passes it to 23-year-old flight attendant Florence Schaffner, seated in the jump seat just behind him. She assumes it is a phone number. Male passengers slip her notes so often she has started wearing wigs on flights to avoid the attention. She drops it in her purse without reading it. Then Cooper leans forward and whispers 7 words that change everything. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner's hands tremble as she unfolds it. The note, written in neat all-capital letters with a felt-tip pen, reads, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." She sits down beside him. Cooper cracks the black attaché case just wide enough for her to see inside, a large cylindrical battery connected by a tangle of wires to 2 rows of red cylinders that look exactly like dynamite sticks. "All I have to do," he says, his voice perfectly steady, "is attach this wire to this gadget here, and we'll all be dead." He closes the case and dictates his demands. His hands do not shake. The demands are extraordinary in their precision. $200,000 in negotiable American currency, specifically $20 bills, 2 front parachutes, and 2 back parachutes. All of it delivered by 5 o'clock that afternoon. No manifesto, no politics, no speeches. Just money and the means to leave the aircraft in midair. Schaffner carries the message to the cockpit. Captain William Scott radios Northwest Orient's Operations Center in Minnesota. The airline's president authorizes full compliance within minutes. 22-year-old flight attendant Tina Mucklow, the youngest crew member on board, takes Schaffner's place beside Cooper as liaison. Passengers are told the delay is a minor mechanical difficulty. For the next 2 hours, Flight 305 circles Puget Sound in a slow holding pattern while the FBI scrambles on the ground. At Seattle First National Bank, agents assemble 10,000 unmarked $20 bills. Every serial number photographed on microfilm, the bills, mostly Series 1963A and 1969 Federal Reserve notes from the San Francisco branch. The bag weighs 21 pounds. The FBI chooses small denominations partly to slow Cooper down. 4 parachutes are gathered, 2 reserve chutes from a local skydiving school, 2 main chutes from a stunt pilot, all packed by a veteran rigger named Earl Cossey. During those 2 hours, Cooper chain smokes Raleigh cigarettes. Mucklow lights at least 8 of them for him, one hand near the bomb trigger, watching her. He orders another bourbon. He is polite, conversational even. He asks Mucklow where she is from. She says Pennsylvania, living in Minneapolis. He says Minnesota is very nice country. When she asks where he is from, his expression changes, and he refuses to answer. When someone tells him the parachutes are coming from McChord Air Force Base, he nods and casually notes that it is only a 20-minute drive from SeaTac, a detail that reveals intimate, specific knowledge of the region. Gazing out at the lights below, he says, "Looks like Tacoma down there." When a passenger approaches the back of the cabin asking about the delay, Cooper stiffens. "If that is a sky marshal," he says quietly, "I don't want any more of that." His strangest moment comes when Mucklow jokingly asks if she can have some of the ransom money. Cooper immediately agrees and hands her a packet of bills. She returns it. Accepting gratuities is against company policy. He tries to tip all 3 flight attendants from his own wallet. All 3 decline. He offers to buy the crew dinner during the Seattle stop. When asked why he chose Northwest Orient specifically, Cooper laughs. "It's not because I have a grudge against your airline," he says. "It's just because I have a grudge." Nobody in the history of American crime has ever hijacked a plane so politely. Mucklow would later say, "He was not nervous. He seemed rather nice, and he was not cruel or nasty." Schaffner would say something different. "We were very, very scared to death. All of us were. I was thinking about dying." Flight 305 touches down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 5:46 p.m. Cooper directs the plane to a remote, partially lit runway, far from the terminal. Cabin lights dimmed. Window shades down. Only one person may approach. Northwest's Seattle operations manager changes out of his airline uniform into civilian clothes to avoid looking like law enforcement. Mucklow descends the front stairs, retrieves the heavy bank bag, and carries it back through the cabin, past rows of seated passengers who still do not know what is happening, and delivers it to Cooper in the last row. He inspects the money. "It looks okay," he says. The 36 passengers are then released. Most walk off the plane and into the terminal before FBI agents tell them, for the very first time, that they have spent the last 3 hours as hostages on a hijacked aircraft. Mucklow makes 3 separate trips to retrieve the 4 parachutes. During the exchange, Cooper uses a pocket knife to slice the canopy from one of the reserve chutes, cutting through individual knots with surprising precision, and uses the shroud lines to fashion an improvised harness for the money bag. He stuffs additional cash into the empty parachute container, Then he removes his clip-on tie and leaves it on the seat. He does not realize in that moment that this small black piece of fabric will become the most important piece of evidence in the entire investigation. At approximately 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 takes off for the second time. Now it carries 5 people: Cooper, Mucklow, and the 3-man cockpit crew. Cooper's flight instructions are disturbingly specific. Southeast toward Mexico City. Maximum altitude, 10,000 feet. Minimum airspeed. Wing flaps at 15 degrees. Landing gear deployed. Cabin unpressurized. He wants darkness in the back of the plane. He wants the cockpit sealed off. He wants to be completely alone. First Officer William Ratatzak would later marvel at this. With the gear down and the flaps at 15 degrees, he explained, the aircraft is limited to about 175 miles per hour. That is barely above stall speed. For Ratatzak, the chilling realization was this: Cooper knew exactly what he was doing. Could he really equate flaps at 15 with 175? Ratatzak said afterward, "The guy's no dummy." After takeoff, Cooper tells Mucklow to walk to the cockpit, close the curtain between coach and first class, and not come back. Her last words to him: "Please, please take the bomb with you." Cooper tells her he will. As she walks forward and turns to close the curtain, she catches a final glimpse of him standing in the aisle, tying the money bag around his waist with lengths of parachute cord. She never sees him again. She would later recall, "It was terribly loud and eerie to have the door open during takeoff, and the airplane was totally dark in the back. I felt so alone at that point." Around 8 p.m., a cockpit warning light flashes. The aft air stair has been deployed. The crew tries the intercom. Cooper answers once, "No." And that single word is the last communication anyone ever receives from D.B. Cooper. At 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitches upward. The pilots feel a sharp pressure change. Their ears pop. The FBI will later reproduce this exact aerodynamic event during a test flight by pushing a 200-pound sled off the aft stairs, which causes the exact same oscillation. The moment is confirmed. Somewhere above the wilderness of southwestern Washington, approximately 25 miles north of Portland, near the Lewis River, D.B. Cooper stepped off the back of a commercial airliner. Outside the aircraft, pitch black night, no moon, heavy cloud cover, freezing rain, winds exceeding 170 miles per hour from the plane's forward speed. The temperature at altitude is roughly 7 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, with a wind chill approaching -70. Below, nothing but dense Pacific Northwest old-growth forest, rivers, and darkness. Cooper is wearing brown loafers, a business suit, and a thin raincoat. No helmet, no gloves, no goggles, no survival gear of any kind. 2 F-106 Delta Dart fighter jets and a T-33 trainer have been trailing the 727 at a distance, flying S-patterns to avoid overtaking the slow-moving airliner. Not one of the pursuit pilots sees anything. A man in dark clothing falling through a moonless, rainy sky is invisible. At 11:02 p.m., Flight 305 lands at Reno Tahoe International Airport, the aft air stair still down, dragging along the tarmac. FBI agents and state troopers surround the aircraft. Captain Scott searches the cabin. Cooper is gone. The money is gone. The bomb is gone. 2 of the 4 parachutes are gone. Left behind in seat 18, E, a black clip-on tie, a tie clip, and 8 Raleigh cigarette butts in the ashtray. Tina Mucklow climbs into an FBI vehicle and breaks down, sobbing. She will later change her name, enter a convent, and become a nun. She has rarely spoken publicly about that night in the 50 years since. The FBI codenames the investigation Norjack, short for Northwest Hijacking, and it becomes one of the longest, most exhaustive cases in the Bureau's history. Within days, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover personally authorizes the use of a SR-71 Blackbird spy plane to retrace Flight 305's exact path. 5 reconnaissance flights are made. Fog and cloud cover render the photography useless. In the spring of 1972, the Bureau launches a massive ground search. 18 days in March, another 18 days in April, deploying 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis, Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, and even a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin, a reservoir directly in the suspected flight path. They find nothing, not a scrap of parachute fabric, not a single bill. Over the next 4 decades, the FBI processes more than 1,000 serious suspects and eliminates all but a handful. The case file grows to over 60 volumes. A 1976 grand jury returns a federal indictment against John Doe, also known as Dan Cooper, for air piracy, keeping the possibility of prosecution open indefinitely. The serial numbers of all 10,000 bills are distributed to banks, casinos, racetracks, and law enforcement agencies worldwide. Not one bill ever surfaces in circulation. Not one. The single most important piece of physical evidence Cooper leaves behind is that black J.C. Penney clip-on tie, a discontinued Towncraft model, last manufactured around 1968. For years, it sits in an FBI evidence vault, unremarkable. Then, in 2009, a team of independent researchers known as the Citizen Sleuths gets access to it. They examine it with a modern scanning electron microscope, and what they find quietly rewrites everything investigators thought they knew about who this man might have been. On the surface of that tie, they find over 100,000 microscopic particles: cerium, strontium sulfide, bismuth, antimony, spiral aluminum chips from metalworking machinery, and most crucially, pure unalloyed titanium. In 1971, pure titanium was extraordinarily rare. It was not found in everyday manufacturing. It existed almost exclusively in aerospace fabrication, in programs like Boeing's supersonic transport project, in chemical production facilities, in advanced electronics plants. The lead researcher notes a devastating detail. In the 1970s, only engineers and senior managers in high-technology fabrication environments wore ties to work. The timing is not accidental. Boeing's supersonic transport program, the SST, had been canceled by Congress in March of 1971, just 8 months before the hijacking. The cancellation triggered the largest aerospace layoff in the history of the Pacific Northwest. Thousands of engineers, machinists, and managers were suddenly unemployed. A man who had worked among titanium and aerospace metals, perhaps for years, suddenly had nothing. And then, in November, someone calling himself Dan Cooper decided he had a grudge. The FBI builds a partial DNA profile from the tie in 2001, but cannot confirm it belongs to Cooper. The cigarette butts, potentially the best DNA source of all, are destroyed by an FBI field office before extraction. A hair sample from the headrest is lost. 66 latent fingerprints found aboard the aircraft match no known suspect. The trail goes cold at the molecular level. On February 10, 1980, more than 8 years after the hijacking, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram is on a family camping trip at Tina Bar, a sandy beach on the north bank of the Columbia River in Washington State, roughly 20 miles from the suspected drop zone. He is smoothing sand for a campfire when his fingers catch on something beneath the surface. He and his cousin dig with sticks and pull out 3 rubber-banded packets of $20 bills, badly deteriorated, shrunken, partially blackened, but still recognizable. The serial numbers match the ransom money exactly. Approximately $5,800 of D.B. Cooper's $200,000 has been sitting in the mud on the banks of the Columbia River. The FBI descends on Tina Bar with backhoes, archaeologists, soil experts, and dozens of agents. They dig trenches along the beach for a full week. They find only tiny additional fragments. In 1986, the recovered bills are split between Ingram and Northwest Orient's insurer. Brian Ingram later sells 15 of the bills at auction for $37,000. But here is where the mystery deepens, because in 2020, scientist Tom Kay publishes a peer-reviewed analysis that turns the Tina Bar discovery inside out. Kay examines microscopic diatoms, tiny aquatic algae found on the surface of the bills. Diatoms bloom in different species depending on the season. The diatoms on Cooper's money are exclusively spring bloom varieties, organisms that only exist from late April through June. They absolutely do not exist in November. What this means is devastating to the simplest explanation. The money did not enter the water on the night Cooper jumped. It entered the water months later. Someone, or something, placed that cash in contact with the river in the spring. Whether Cooper buried it and returned, whether an accomplice moved it, whether dredging operations along the Columbia relocated it from somewhere else entirely. Nobody knows. What has never been found: Cooper's body, the parachute he used, the remaining $194,200, the briefcase, his clothing, his sunglasses, his mysterious brown paper bag, the one item no investigator has ever been able to account for, the one that may have contained boots, gloves, or goggles he needed to survive. Not one of the remaining 9,710 ransom bills has ever appeared in circulation anywhere in the world. Not one. Over the decades, the FBI narrows its focus to a small number of individuals who fit the profile more closely than any others. None of them can be definitively confirmed. All of them take the secret, if they have one, to the grave. Richard Floyd McCoy, Jr. is perhaps the most tantalizing possibility. A decorated Vietnam veteran, Green Beret, helicopter pilot, recipient of the Purple Heart and Distinguished Flying Cross, McCoy commits a nearly identical hijacking on April 7, 1972, just 5 months after Cooper. He boards a United Airlines Boeing 727, brandishes a fake grenade, demands $500,000 and 4 parachutes, and bails out over Provo, Utah. Unlike Cooper, McCoy is caught within 72 hours. At his arrest, agents find most of the $500,000 still in his possession, along with parachute equipment. Sentenced to 45 years in federal prison, he escapes in 1974 by crashing a garbage truck through the prison gate and is killed in an FBI shootout 3 months later. The FBI officially rules McCoy out as Cooper. He was only 27 in 1971, he didn't drink or smoke, and witnesses never mentioned his conspicuously large ears. But in 2022, McCoy's own children come forward after their mother's death and reveal they have found a modified military parachute rig on the family property in North Carolina, a rig that an aviation researcher identifies as matching the precise specifications of the chute Cooper used. The FBI seizes the parachute and a skydiving logbook in September 2023, the first investigative action taken in the case since it was suspended in 2016. The FBI returns the parachute in late 2025 without explanation. DNA testing remains complicated by decades of degradation. Kenneth Christiansen is nominated by his own brother. A World War II-era paratrooper with over 80 jumps to his name, Christiansen works as a Northwest Orient Airlines purser for years, giving him intimate, professional knowledge of the Boeing 727. He smokes Raleigh cigarettes. He drinks bourbon. He is 45 years old in 1971. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner says his photographs fit her memory of the hijacker's appearance more closely than those of any other suspect. After the hijacking, Christiansen, who has never had significant money, suddenly has plenty. When he dies of cancer in 1994, his family finds $200,000 in bank accounts, gold watches, and an expensive stamp collection. On his deathbed, he tells his brother Lyle, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." Lyle refuses to listen. The FBI rules Christensen out, citing his height, approximately 5'8", versus Cooper's reported 6'1". The question of whether terrified flight attendants accurately measure heights in the middle of a hijacking remains, of course, unanswered. Robert Rackstraw is a Vietnam veteran, pilot, paratrooper, and explosives expert whose biography reads like a thriller novel. He fakes his own death in 1978. He uses 22 separate fake identities across 5 countries. He is acquitted of murdering his stepfather. His military career ends in disgrace 5 months before the Cooper hijacking. A filmmaker and a 40-member cold case team spend years trying to decode letters allegedly sent by Cooper to newspapers after the jump, and believe they find hidden text in one reading. "I'm Lieutenant Robert W. Rackstraw." Rackstraw himself is characteristically coy when reporters ask him directly. He smiles and says, "I could have been. Could have been." He dies of heart disease in 2019 without ever confessing to anything. And then there is L.D. Cooper, identified by his niece Marla, in 2011. Marla says she was 8 years old at her grandmother's house in Sisters, Oregon during Thanksgiving 1971. She recalls her uncle and another man planning something very mischievous with expensive walkie-talkies. The morning after the hijacking, L.D. returns wearing a bloody white T-shirt, claiming a car accident. She recalls overhearing, "We did it. Our money problems are over. We hijacked an airplane." Marla also says that L.D. was obsessed with a French-Belgian comic book series called Les Aventures de Dan Cooper, an obscure story about a Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot and skydiver, and had one of the comics thumbtacked to his wall. The series was never translated into English. It was never sold in the United States. The name Dan Cooper, the alias used in Portland, is not a random invention. Someone knew that comic. The FBI calls it a credible lead. DNA testing is inconclusive. The question that has haunted this case for over 50 years is the simplest one of all. Did D.B. Cooper survive? The arguments that he did not are formidable. He jumped into pitch-black night, freezing rain, and 170-mile-per-hour winds wearing loafers and a business suit. His main parachute was a non-steerable military surplus chute. His reserve, the one he could have used as backup, had been sabotaged accidentally. It was a training dummy, sewn shut, completely non-functional. He had no helmet, no goggles, no gloves, no navigation device. FBI Special Agent Larry Carr, who ran the Norjack investigation from 2007 to 2010, put it bluntly. Diving into the wilderness without a plan, without the right equipment in such terrible conditions, he probably never even got his chute open. But the arguments that he survived are equally stubborn, and they have never gone away. No body has ever been found despite one of the most extensive wilderness searches in American history. And as researcher Tom Kay has noted, bodies do not typically disappear in that part of the Pacific Northwest forest. The diatom evidence on the Tina Bar money proves human hands touched that cash months after the hijacking. Within 7 months of Cooper's jump, 5 copycat hijackers perform nearly identical leaps from Boeing 727s, and all 5 survive. Earl Cossey, the veteran rigger who packed Cooper's main parachute, estimates that anyone with 6 or 7 practice jumps could have made it. And the main chute Cooper chose, a military C-9, was designed to open reliably even when a jumper is tumbling. Skydivers call it the pit bull of parachutes. 3 hours after the jump, a grocery store near Hyson, Washington, well within the calculated drop zone, is burglarized. The thief takes only 2 things: beef jerky and gloves. And then there is the money. Not a single bill from the remaining ransom has ever been spent anywhere in the world. This cuts both ways. Either Cooper died and the cache is buried under decades of pine needles and volcanic ash. The 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption reshaped the entire search area, potentially entombing evidence forever. Or Cooper survived and was simply smart enough to never touch a single traceable bill. The $200,000 in 1971, money is worth over $1.5 million today. Somewhere, someone made a decision about that fortune. Either nature made it in the form of a frozen forest floor, or a man did. On July 8, 2016, after 45 years, the FBI's Seattle field office officially suspends the active investigation. Their statement is brief and matter-of-fact. The resources can better be used elsewhere. They add one caveat. Should any specific physical evidence emerge related to the parachutes or the ransom money, individuals should contact their local field office. That caveat would prove prophetic. The 2023 seizure of the McCoy family parachute, the ongoing DNA analysis, the independent researchers still working the titanium particle angle, the case has never truly gone cold. Cooper's imprint on American culture is extraordinary for a man no one can identify. David Lynch named the protagonist of Twin Peaks, the beloved FBI agent Dale Bartholomew Cooper, directly after the hijacker. The case has appeared in Loki, in Prison Break, in News Radio. For years, an annual festival in Ariel, Washington drew thousands of fans, amateur investigators, and self-declared Cooperites, all gathering in the small town nearest the suspected drop zone to celebrate the anniversary of the jump. Boeing quietly installed physical devices on every 727 in its fleet, devices that prevent the aft air stair from ever being lowered in flight again. They call them Cooper vanes. The hijacking helped usher in the modern era of airport security. Metal detectors, baggage screening, photo identification. Every single time you take off your shoes at a security checkpoint, you are, in some small way, living in the world D.B. Cooper made. The enduring fascination has always had a simple explanation. Cooper never hurt anyone. He was polite to the flight crew. He tried to tip the flight attendants. He offered to buy them dinner. He released every passenger safely before the second takeoff. He apologized for the inconvenience. And then he stepped off the back of a jet plane into the darkness with $200,000 and a parachute that may or may not have opened over a forest that may or may not still hold his bones. Sociologist Otto Larsen once described it as an awesome feat in the battle of man against the machine. One man overcoming technology, the corporation, the establishment, the system. Americans have always had a weakness for that story.